Welcome back. Top of the hour. Jury watch continues in Florida. In Tampa, we are waiting for jurors to come back with a verdict in the murder case against Jonchuck. Will they find him guilty by reason of insanity? Will they find him guilty of murder? We are waiting to find out. So far, they have been deliberating a little bit more than 6 hours. They got the case around 4:30 yesterday afternoon. In just a moment, we're going to be speaking live with a reporter from the Tampa Bay Times who has been covering this case from the very beginning. He's going to bring us an update on what is going on, what the feel is right now in the courthouse as we wait to hear this verdict. But first, we want to take you back to the beginning. Law&Crime's President Rachel Stockman now with a recap of this case.
This Florida man, Jonchuck's fate is now in the hands of a jury. It's up to them to decide whether he is guilty or insane for dropping his 5-year-old daughter off the Tampa Bay bridge. The prosecution and defense presented their closing arguments Monday after more than 3 weeks of trial. The case saw dozens of witnesses, including several mental health experts. Each side dueled over whether Jonchuck fit the legal definition of insanity, that he did not know the consequences of his action or didn't know what he was doing was wrong when he killed his daughter.
It doesn't make rational sense now. It will never make rational sense. It is insanity.
Prosecutors focused on Jonchuck running from the scene after he threw her off the bridge.
Why would he be fleeing? Because he knows that what he did was wrong. It's consciousness of guilt. And if he knows what he did was wrong, then he is not insane.
And that Jonchuck's alleged delusions did not fit his actual actions.
But if the delusion is that both he and Phoebe both have to die to save the world, he didn't follow the delusion. Because last time I checked, he's still alive. He's sitting right over there in the purple shirt.
The defense countered with Jonchuck's bizarre behavior after he was arrested to argue he didn't understand what he had done.
Certainly, somebody who realizes that they've just killed their daughter and that that is wrong is not asking to go to the airport. Doesn't make sense that they're asking to go to Babylon.
If Jonchuck is found guilty, he will serve life in prison. If he is found not guilty by reason of insanity, he will be committed to a state mental facility. For the Law&Crime Network, I'm Rachel Stockman.
Well, we are 6 hours into jury deliberations. Joining me now live from Tampa is Josh Solomon. He is a reporter with the Tampa Bay Times who has been covering this case from the very beginning, who has been bringing us gavel-to-gavel coverage, as they say. Josh, thanks for being with us. Tell me, has it been pretty quiet down there so far this morning?
Stacey, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, the jury was brought in for about 5 minutes this morning. The judge just basically said good morning. She asked, like she always does, if they've heard any news or read anything improper about the case that they shouldn't have seen. They all said no, and so she said, okay, have at it. And they've been back in the deliberation room ever since.
Tell me, I assume there are a lot of members of the media standing by there. Is there anyone else hanging around? And I've actually been wondering, have there been other family members of Phoebe who were there for the duration of the trial?
No, there have been some people, spectators, who don't have a stake in the case, but enjoy watching trials or have been captivated by this one. But there hasn't been any family members of John's or of Phoebe's. I mean, nobody for either of them in the courtroom at all.
As you and your team write, this is a case that comes down to one question, evil or insane, but it's a case that actually is pretty complicated when we think of all of the expert testimony and the war of the experts that we saw playing out over the duration of the trial. We have experts on here always say that you can never predict how long a jury will deliberate, but do you think it will be a little while because of all of the details in the medical testimony?
Yeah, I mean, what we've been told by just lawyers around the community that we talked to was that the quicker the verdict, the more likely there'd be a conviction, and the longer it goes, the better it is for the defense. So, we'll just have to see. It's hard to speculate as to what might happen or how long they'll be out. But I think that the general consensus is that the longer they are out, the better it is for the defense. And if, ultimately, if they're out for a couple days, then we're running into the possibility of a hung jury. So we're just going to have to wait and see.
Do you have any prediction after sitting through the whole trial? What is your feeling? Were you convinced one way or another that he was insane or that he actually knew what he was doing?
Yeah, I don't really like to speculate. I'm not on the jury and I'm not a lawyer. But I will say that I do think that both sides put on cases that were at times very compelling and at times, had some weak spots. They both have burdens to meet. And so it's really, when I think about it, how I might, vote if I were on the jury, I just try to think about the burden of proof. Am I convinced, by clear and convincing evidence that he's insane? And that's really tough to say. It's going to be up to each individual juror.
Let me ask you this, though. Do you think that it got confusing to the jurors at any point when we heard so much medical testimony back and forth and when there were questions about these experts and the credibility of the experts themselves? I mean, do you think there was sort of a lot of technical stuff there, or do you think that the jury was really able to grasp all of it?
Yeah, the thing that I found most confusing was that, the jury wasn't instructed on the law really until afterward. If I had been on the jury, I think I would have found that frustrating. I would have liked to have seen the law and then know sort of how I'm grouping that testimony, how I can apply it to the law. And so, I know that this is just how trials work, but I think thinking since it was such a long case, I would have found that helpful if I'd been a juror. No doubt that there were 3 full weeks of testimony. There were just a lot of witnesses. Some of them were on the stand for more than a day. So no doubt, I mean, there are a lot of things the jurors are going to have to filter through, and I'm sure that there are elements that have been confusing or that they're going to have to look back on, or that they might have different, recollections about. So I'm sure that's why we're 6 hours and counting, and I'm sure that's why it's been as long as it has.
Quickly, just a couple more questions before we let you go. Psychiatrist Emily Lazaro, a witness for the prosecution, was someone that was on the stand several times, and there were attempts really to call her credibility into question. Her argument is that Jonchuck was malingering, faking his symptoms. But again, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of cross-examination. Do you think that there was any sort of distraction when it got to, okay, what about her? What about questions? I know this wasn't actually introduced to the jury, but questions about how she presented herself and dressed, and whether she was serious enough, statements she made before and after.
Yeah. So Dr. Lazaro was a very interesting witness. The defense had been fighting about her for 6 months now. They've been trying to keep her off the case, and the judge ultimately, decided whatever issues they had with her and her testimony, they could address on cross-examination. So that's exactly what we saw. I think they did their best to try to limit her credibility. The judge would not let them talk about what she was wearing when she evaluated Jonchuck in the state hospital. That there was some sort of issue that was alluded to in depositions, and they were going to show us video, but the judge didn't allow that to happen. There was some questions about whether she was board certified because she went and took or she was going to take a board certification exam, but she asked if she'd be allowed to breast pump, and the defense sort of started to, frankly, hit her on that, and she ended up breaking down crying on the stand. So there were a lot of elements of her testimony. Frankly, substantively, she's a little bit sort of out to the side. She's the only of the 5 mental health experts in the case that doesn't think that Jonchuck has a mental illness, which puts her a little bit out on the fringe. So we're really, it's tough to tell what the jurors are going to make of any of that testimony. She apparently perhaps said something about how she didn't need to evaluate Jonchuck to know that he wasn't insane. She denied saying that. The defense called a witness that heard her say that. It's just really tough to tell.
Josh, thanks for your analysis. Last question for you before we let you go. I know in your many articles you and your colleagues write about how this is a case that the region has been watching and that really the entire Tampa Bay area is waiting for closure. What is it about this case? Obviously, it is always tragic when a child dies. What do you think it is about this case that has captivated the attention of so many down in the Tampa Bay area?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, the day that Jonchuck killed Phoebe, it was, gosh, he did it in such a horrible, horrific, and very public way. I mean, he dropped her off of a bridge. And of course, there's an element that this was that a father had killed his daughter. And some of the more tragic elements. I mean, if that weren't tragic enough, the family was on the radar of the Florida Department of Children and Families. In the hours before Jonchuck dropped Phoebe, he had been seen by priests, lawyers, deputies who evaluated him to see if he was a danger to himself and others. And there were all these instances where this could have been prevented, and for whatever reason it wasn't. There were people who could have stepped in, or in whose hands were tied, or they tried to, and so, given just the nature of the case and the fact that there were places where Phoebe could have been saved, but wasn't, makes it all the more tragic.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Indeed, a very tragic case that we know a lot of people are watching closely as jury deliberations now get into their 7th hour. Thanks again for joining us. We do appreciate it, and we will be looking to you for updates as the deliberations continue. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this.